In 2019, in Fontana, a small city in Southern California where families go about their routines and children play in quiet neighborhoods, there was a boy named Noah Quattro. Noah was 4 years old. Depending on who you asked, he was either 4 or just turning 5. In photographs, Noah looks like any other child his age, bright-eyed, soft-faced, smiling in that way children do when they still believe the world is safe. He liked cartoons. He liked playing. He liked the simple things that make up a child's universe. Nothing about those pictures suggests danger. Nothing suggests fear. And that is what makes this story so disturbing. Because while Noah Quattro looked like an ordinary little boy, his life was quietly unraveling behind closed doors, in a home where he was supposed to be protected. Noah was living in Fontana, California, under the care of adults who were legally responsible for him. On the surface, there was nothing that immediately set his household apart from thousands of others in the area. No obvious alarms. No emergency calls that drew attention early enough. No moment where the world suddenly stopped and said, "Something is wrong here." Instead, what happened to Noah unfolded slowly. Silently. In pieces. This is not a story about a single bad day. It is a story about days that kept coming, days when warning signs appeared, days when questions should have been asked louder, days when a little boy depended on adults to notice that something was wrong. But they didn't. Or they noticed and nothing changed. In 2019, Noah Quattro died after repeated abuse. That is not speculation. That is not opinion. That is what investigators, doctors, and prosecutors would later establish using medical evidence, timelines, and testimony. Repeated abuse. That phrase matters because it means what happened to Noah was not sudden. It was not unavoidable. It did not come without opportunities for intervention. Somewhere between those smiling photographs and the reality of what investigators uncovered, Noah became a child the system failed to protect. There were signs. There were moments. There were chances. But they were missed. And in cases like this, the most painful question is never what happened at the end. It's what happened before and why no one stopped it. This documentary is about Noah Quattro. It is about the adults entrusted with his care. It is about the systems meant to protect vulnerable children. And it is about how a 4-year-old boy slipped through every layer of protection that should have kept him safe. Before we go any further, if stories like this matter to you, please like this video. It helps these stories reach more people, and it helps ensure that names like Noah Quattro are not forgotten. Because remembering him is the first step in understanding how this could happen, and how it must never happen again. From the outside, the home where Noah Quattro lived did not stand out. It was located in Fontana, in a neighborhood where families came and went, where daily life looked ordinary, where nothing immediately suggested that something was deeply wrong inside. To neighbors, this was just another household, another front door, another place where a child lived. Noah was living under the care of his mother, Nicole Moore, and her boyfriend, Joseph Smith. They were the adults legally and morally responsible for Noah's safety, health, and well-being. They were the people entrusted with his life. On paper, Noah had a home. He had adults who were supposed to feed him, watch over him, and protect him. From the outside, there was no obvious chaos spilling into the street, no constant police presence, no visible emergency that forced immediate attention. And that appearance mattered, because cases like this don't always fail loudly. They fail quietly. Inside the home, daily life followed routines that, at first glance, may have appeared normal. Adults came and went. Days passed. Time moved forward. But behind that normalcy was a reality investigators would later uncover, one that looked very different from what the outside world saw. Noah was not living in a home where his needs came first. According to court records and investigative findings, the adults responsible for Noah controlled every part of his daily life, including access to food, care, and basic necessities. These were not decisions Noah could question. He was 4 years old. He depended entirely on the people around him. What made this situation especially dangerous was how isolated it was. Children Noah's age don't have the language to explain what they're experiencing. They can't advocate for themselves in adult systems. When something is wrong, they rely on others to notice: teachers, relatives, caregivers, authorities. In Noah's case, that safety net never fully tightened. From the outside, nothing about the household screamed emergency. There were no loud alarms, no dramatic events that forced immediate action early on. Instead, what was happening to Noah unfolded gradually, inside walls that kept the truth hidden. This is where many child abuse cases become most difficult to detect. Because abuse doesn't always look like chaos. Sometimes it looks like silence. Investigators would later determine that what Noah experienced was not accidental. It was not the result of confusion or misunderstanding. It was the result of decisions made repeatedly by the adults responsible for him. Decisions that affected his body. Decisions that affected his health. Decisions that ultimately affected whether he lived or died. What's most unsettling is that, during this time, Noah was still a child who smiled. A child who showed up in photos. A child who existed in the same community as everyone else. There was no visible warning label on the door. And that's what makes this part of the story so important. Because when people later asked how this could happen, how a 4-year-old boy could suffer for so long without rescue, the answer wasn't simple neglect by one person. It was a combination of control inside the home, silence from the outside, and a system that failed to intervene before it was too late. Noah Quattro was not invisible, but the reality of his life was hidden. And by the time the truth finally surfaced, the damage had already been done. In the next part of this story, we're going to look at the warning signs, the moments where intervention might have been possible, and the signals that, in hindsight, now seem impossible to ignore. By the time investigators began piecing together what happened to Noah Quattro, one truth became unavoidable. This did not happen without warning. The signs were there. Not all at once. Not loudly. But consistently enough that, in hindsight, they form a pattern that is impossible to ignore. Noah was a child living in Fontana, a place with schools, mandated reporters, and systems specifically designed to notice when something is wrong. Children Noah's age are seen by adults outside their home: teachers, staff, caregivers, administrators. These are the people trained to spot changes in behavior, appearance, or health. And in Noah's case, those changes were noticed. Court records and investigative reporting later confirmed that concerns had been raised about Noah's well-being before his death. Reports were made. Questions were asked. At least one child welfare agency became aware that something might not be right. Those reports were handled by San Bernardino County Children and Family Services, the agency responsible for investigating allegations of abuse or neglect in the area. This is where the system was supposed to step in. Child Protective Services exist for one reason: to intervene before harm becomes irreversible. When reports are made, they trigger assessments, home visits, interviews, and follow-ups. In theory, this process creates layers of protection around vulnerable children. But theory is not what failed Noah. Reality did. According to public records and later legal proceedings, the concerns surrounding Noah did not result in effective intervention. Whatever actions were taken did not remove him from danger. Whatever evaluations occurred did not stop the harm. And that gap, Between noticing something is wrong and actually stopping it is where Noah remained. Children don't always show pain in obvious ways. Sometimes the signs are subtle, changes in behavior, withdrawal, fearfulness, or physical indicators that raise questions without providing clear answers. That's why child protection systems rely on patterns, persistence, and follow-through. In Noah's case, follow-through failed. What's especially troubling is that the adults responsible for Noah's care remained in control of his daily life during this period. Despite concerns, despite reports, Noah continued to live in the same environment, dependent on the same people. This is not uncommon in child abuse cases. Systems are overloaded. Caseworkers manage heavy caseloads. Decisions are made under pressure, with incomplete information, and sometimes with misplaced trust. But for the child at the center of the case, those systemic limitations are invisible. All Noah knew was that nothing changed. He did not get safer. He did not get removed. He did not get protected. And this is the hardest part to confront. Because when people later asked, "How could this happen?" the answer was not that no one noticed. It was that noticing did not lead to action strong enough to save him. The warning signs were there, but they were not enough to trigger the protection Noah needed. Cases like this force an uncomfortable reckoning. They challenge the belief that reporting alone is enough. They expose how fragile safety becomes when systems fail to act decisively. Noah Quattro did not fall through the cracks because there were no cracks. He fell through because the cracks were already there. And they stayed open. Comment below if you believe the warning signs were ignored. We read every comment. Because the conversation about what failed Noah doesn't end here. It gets even harder in the next chapter, when the timeline reaches the point where intervention was no longer possible. By early May of 2019, the situation surrounding Noah Quattro had reached a point where there was very little margin left for survival. According to court records, medical findings, and official investigative timelines, the days leading up to Noah's death were not marked by a sudden emergency. They were marked by continuation, the continuation of the same conditions, the same control, and the same failure to intervene. Noah was still living in Fontana, still under the care of his mother, Nicole Moore, and her boyfriend, Joseph Smith. Nothing about his living situation had fundamentally changed. In the final days, Noah's physical condition had deteriorated significantly, a fact that would later be confirmed by medical professionals and forensic experts. This decline was not sudden. It was consistent with ongoing harm and neglect over time. Court documents would later establish that Noah was severely malnourished. This was not the result of illness. It was not caused by a medical condition. It was the result of prolonged deprivation. Doctors would later testify that his body showed clear signs of long-term suffering. These findings were based on medical examinations, autopsy results, and expert analysis, not speculation. On May 13, 2019, emergency services were finally contacted. By the time first responders arrived, Noah was unresponsive. Despite efforts to save him, Noah Quattro was pronounced dead. He was 4 years old. The cause of death, as determined by the coroner, was homicide. Specifically, Noah died as a result of starvation and physical abuse. This conclusion was supported by medical evidence and later presented in court. What makes this timeline especially difficult to confront is that nothing about Noah's death was sudden or unpredictable in hindsight. The physical state documented by doctors reflected prolonged harm that occurred over weeks and months, not hours. This is why prosecutors would later argue that Noah's death was preventable. Because the evidence showed time. Time when intervention could have happened. Time when care could have been provided. Time when decisions could have changed the outcome. Instead, Noah remained in the same environment until his body could no longer endure it. In the aftermath of his death, investigators immediately focused on the people responsible for his care. The home in Fontana became a crime scene. Medical findings were scrutinized, records were pulled, prior reports were reviewed. What emerged was not confusion about what happened, but clarity. Clarity that Noah Quattro had been failed repeatedly. Clarity that the abuse was ongoing. Clarity that the adults responsible for him had opportunities to stop it, and did not. This chapter of the story does not rely on dramatic language or speculation, because it doesn't need to. The facts alone are heavy enough. A 4-year-old child died in a home where he should have been safest. He died after prolonged abuse. And his death marked the moment when the system could no longer look away. In the next section, the focus shifts to accountability, to the arrests, charges, and courtroom proceedings that followed, and to how the justice system responded after Noah Quattro was already gone. After the death of Noah Quattro, the response from authorities was immediate and decisive. What had been a child welfare concern became a homicide investigation. Detectives from local law enforcement, working alongside prosecutors and medical experts, began reconstructing Noah's final months in Fontana. They reviewed medical records, prior reports to Child Protective Services, witness statements, and physical evidence from the home where Noah had been living. The medical examiner's findings were central to the case. The coroner ruled Noah's death a homicide, citing starvation and physical abuse as the cause. This determination removed any ambiguity. It established that Noah did not die from natural causes, illness, or accident. His death was the result of deliberate and prolonged harm. Based on those findings, authorities arrested Noah's mother, Nicole Moore, and her boyfriend, Joseph Smith. Both were taken into custody and formally charged. Prosecutors filed multiple felony counts, including murder and felony child abuse. The charges reflected not a single act, but a pattern, a course of conduct that prosecutors argued showed conscious disregard for Noah's life. In court filings, the prosecution laid out a timeline supported by medical evidence, expert testimony, and documented behavior inside the home. They argued that Noah's condition could not have developed overnight. It required time. And during that time, the adults responsible for him failed to provide basic care. The defense, as expected, challenged the prosecution's interpretation. Court proceedings included arguments over responsibility, intent, and the extent of each defendant's role. But the physical evidence, particularly the medical findings, remained central throughout. As the case moved forward, public attention intensified. Noah Quattro's name became widely known in California and beyond. His death sparked outrage, not only at the individuals charged, but at the systems that had failed to remove him from harm earlier. Ultimately, the courtroom became the place where accountability was formally assigned. Both Nicole Moore and Joseph Smith were convicted on charges related to Noah Quattro's death. The verdicts reflected the jury's acceptance of the prosecution's case, that Noah's death was the result of prolonged abuse and neglect, not an isolated mistake. Sentencing followed. The court imposed lengthy prison terms, reflecting the severity of the crime and the vulnerability of the victim. In California, crimes involving the abuse and death of a young child carry some of the harshest penalties under the law, and this case was no exception. For the justice system, the verdicts marked a conclusion. For Noah, they came too late. If you're finding this documentary important, hit the subscribe button so you don't miss future investigations. Because while courtrooms can deliver punishment, they cannot undo what happened. And the final chapter of this story is not about the people who were sentenced. It's about what Noah Quattro's death exposed and the questions that still remain. When the courtroom doors finally closed and sentences were handed down, the legal case surrounding Noah Quattro reached its end. But the story did not. Because the true impact of Noah's death was never confined to a single home in Fontana, or even to the courtroom where accountability was assigned. It extended far beyond, into public outrage, institutional reckoning, and questions that still do not have complete answers. Noah Quattro was 4 years old when he died. He did not leave behind written words. He did not testify. He did not get a chance to explain what his life had become. What he left behind was evidence. Evidence that forced an entire system to confront itself. After Noah's death became public, outrage followed swiftly. Community members demanded to know how a child who had already come to the attention of child welfare authorities could remain in a dangerous environment until it was too late. Media investigations revisited timelines. Advocates questioned procedures. Parents asked the most painful question of all: if this could happen to Noah, who else is at risk? Attention turned again to San Bernardino County Children and Family Services, the agency responsible for responding to reports about Noah's well-being before his death. Lawsuits followed, alleging negligence and systemic failure. These legal actions were not just about compensation, they were about accountability. They were about forcing transparency. Cases like Noah's often expose a difficult truth. Child protection systems are designed to intervene, but they operate under pressure, limited resources, and human judgment. When they work, children are saved quietly, without headlines. When they fail, the consequences are irreversible. In the wake of Noah Quattro's death, officials promised reviews. Procedures were scrutinized. Internal assessments were conducted. Public statements acknowledged failure. But for many, those steps felt painfully insufficient. Because reforms, however necessary, always arrive after the damage is done. Noah's legacy exists in that uncomfortable space between intention and outcome. He became a name cited in policy discussions, a case referenced in training materials, a reminder used to justify calls for reform. But behind every reform conversation is the same hard reality. Noah should never have needed to become a lesson. The unresolved questions linger. Were the warning signs taken seriously enough? Were the responses timely? Did workload, policy, or human error prevent decisive action? And most importantly, has anything truly changed to stop this from happening again? There are no easy answers. What is clear is this: Noah Quattro's story is not just about one child, one home, or one failure. It is about how responsibility is shared across individuals and institutions. It is about what happens when systems designed to protect the most vulnerable do not act quickly enough. And it is about memory. Because when cases fade from headlines, when trials conclude, and when reforms quietly stall, the risk is forgetting. Forgetting reduces tragedy to statistics. Forgetting allows patterns to repeat. Remembering does the opposite. Remembering Noah Quattro forces attention. It forces discomfort. It forces accountability. If this story stayed with you, please like the video, leave a comment telling us where you're watching from, and hit the subscribe button on Real Crime Documentary Stories. Because remembering victims like Noah is one way we demand better.